What's up, gamers? Welcome back to another After Action Report. I'm Josh Joshi Howard. Today we're going to talk about the Teams event I went to almost 2 weeks ago at this point, Bridge City Brawl. As you're probably aware, after this event, I got laid out by COVID. I was not able to record very much. I wasn't do a whole lot. Basically, like Monday, Tuesday after the event, largely confined to my bed after that. So, I'm not really coughing anymore. I don't have any of the aches. So, should be good. I have another event this weekend, so I get to see all my friends. Yay! Before we go too far, I do want to give a shout out, as always, to the organizer of this event. This one was organized by Umikai. They've been doing a bunch of different events of varying types down in the Portland area. I think they were talking about they did alcohol events, they do Pokemon events. I think they do some other stuff at a number of conventions, and this is their second 40K event, so hopefully they'll be doing more in the future. For this event, I was playing with Deepstrike Gang, myself, Ken Bush, Timothy Grant, Nicholas Fromme, and Torrin Holmes. And we went down to Portland in order to try and take this down. I believe this was my first 5-mans teams event, because I did the 6-mans in Australia, and then I have another 8-mans coming up this next weekend. And then, of course, I'll be at Challengers Cup in a few weeks. But for this event, the list that I ended up playing was not one that I had put the most time into. I was more or less assigned to play the recon disposition. And as I've expressed before, I really don't enjoy playing the style of list that Nemo and Tucker had some success with. So instead, I was playing a list that I have had recommended to me by John Winter Russell in the past. And that list, I've talked about it a little bit on a couple of other videos, but it's Hammer the Emperor plus Designation Force, and you play it in the Reconaissance disposition. It is Gaunt's Ghost, a Rogal commander with the Extra and Order enhancement, a second Rogal commander with the Veteran Crew for the reroll ones, 2 Tauroxes, 2 Hellhounds. I like them with multi-meltas, but you can put them with Flamer. Heavy Bolter is not as good as it used to be, simply because a lot of the firing lanes are shorter in this edition than they have been in the past. I played 2 Hippos with maximum meltas, 2 units of Krieg Engineers, 2 Leman Russ Exterminators, 3 Scout Sentinels with las cannons, and 1 unit of Tempestus Aquilons. Now, this list is pretty good at just making sure you get points. You're not necessarily going to get a lot of blowouts, you're not necessarily going to get a lot of big wins, but you shouldn't get a lot of large losses either, as long as you understand your matchups well. It's more or less 2 of the package that we've seen in the past: the Rogal Commander, Leman Russ Exterminator, Scout Sentinel, and Hellhound. So you're going to get those reroll ones to hit, +1 AP, ignoring cover on your Rogal Dorns, and then you can buff that with the +1 AP from whatever the extra AP stratagem of Hammer the Emperor is. One of the big things that you do end up seeing in this come up reasonably often is all of your smoke infantry, so as your Krieg combat engineers and your Aquilons, and then your Scout Sentinels. If they are within some distance, I think it's 9 or 12, I would have to double check, but they can point at a thing and say, the rest of my army gets +3 detection range against that. So you can see things from a little bit further away. And you also get a D3 +3 reactive move on all of your infantry, which means that Gaunt's Ghosts are generally very safe. After that, you've got enough other stuff, right? You have 3 Scout Sentinels, Aquilons, 2 units of Engineers, 2 Tauroxes. So you have like 8 things that can very easily go push buttons that are relatively cheap, and also Gaunt's Ghosts, who will oftentimes do a lot of screening for the first couple of turns before transitioning into button pushers for the second half of the game. And you have enough damage that not a lot of armies can just run at you, right? You have 6 units that are toughness 10 2-up save with a bunch of wounds. So you have your 2 Hellhounds, your 2 Russes, and your 2 Dorns. So you're not easy to just run at. Is this list super good? It's fine. Like, you're going to fairly consistently be coming back with points. Like I said, you're not necessarily going to be getting big points, but the other big thing is I feel like this list has a pretty significant weakness to take and hold lists in general. It doesn't love playing the engage in all fronts, partly because like the screens in terms of like blocking charges and all that kind of stuff is not super easy for this kind of list. Instead, you just kind of have to make sure you're being very proactive with your pre-measuring, but you have a lot of threat range by being able to make your Rogal Dorns go 19 inches and then still shoot. For our first round, we ended up playing up against Command Point Reroll, and I got to play up against Chris Hutchings, or Hutch. He was playing Tyranids, Subterranean Assault in the Disruption disposition. He had 1 Broodlord with 10 Gene Stealers, a Neuro Tyrant with 6 Zoanthropes, the Swarm Lord, 1 Trigon with the Vanguard Intellect. I think this is redeploy. 1 Trigon with the Trigon Prime, so he hits a little bit harder. 2 units of 10 Termagants, 1 Biovore, an additional unit of 10 Gene Stealers, 1 Moloch, the one that does the mortals when they pop out, a Neurolictor, a Psychophage, 1 unit of Raveners, and 1 unit of 6 Tyranid Warriors. Hutch was a good guy, but I wish he had been a bit more forthcoming with some of the abilities that his units had. There were a couple times where it felt like he was trying to, surprise me with some of his rolls, but as you'll see, it didn't really matter all that much. So the core game that's happening between Recon and Disruption is the Disruption player is going to try and put decoys on objectives. So you can put a decoy on all of these objectives. And you get points for doing that, and you get more points if you do it in your opponent's territory. The Recon player, simply by touching a terrain piece where your opponent has one of these decoys set up, you remove the decoy like instantly. And then what the Recon player also needs to do is they need to do an action and point at something and say, hey, I can see that guy. And you get points by removing all of your opponent's decoys and also pointing at things. In my experience, this mission is incredibly favored towards the Recon player. It's not necessarily going to be like a big win, but it is pretty consistently going to be a win for the Recon player because of how easy it oftentimes is to remove all these tokens and make sure you're going to be getting your 45. So it's very consistent for the Recon player to be getting their 45 primary, and it's not very consistent for the Disruption player to get to 45. One of the big things about looking at my opponent's list is that there wasn't a lot of real threat to like actually fighting my tanks, right? He has the Zone Throat Brick, which is like 6 hitting on 2s lethal las cannons, and then maybe the Trigon Prime, if it like gets into a tank, has an opportunity to kill it, but a lot of the times like the Genestealer Break isn't super likely to kill even a Hellhound, simply because it's like wounding on 6s the entire time, and it is dev wounds, but you're only going to get so many dev wounds through, and that's all the damage you're going to get. So I knew that if the Zone Thropes were going to be coming out, as soon as they show themselves, I have a lot of damage 3. I can make sure that I can move my tanks into range so that as soon as the Zone Thropes go for a vehicle at all, I should be able to take them down in return. And once that is true, I should be able to have total control and be basically uncontested on the rest of the board. One of the things to know about Zone Thropes is that their range is relatively short. The range of their las cannons is only 24 inches. And so basically, in order to make sure I could be safe from that, as long as they didn't kill a Dorn, I felt very confident that I was going to be able to deal with the rest of it. And so I put like a Dorn like here, and then I made sure that the distance between this Dorn and, what was it? I think it was a Scout Sentinel right here. This distance from here to the front of the Scout Sentinel needs to be slightly more than 16 inches, because if this is more than 16 inches, and then, so 16 here, and then an additional 8 for like the blocking things out with the Sentinel, you should be relatively safe. The one thing that you do need to be careful of is sometimes, if you're worried about them being able to come in only 6 inches away with the tunnels, then this needs to be a little bit farther. This needs to be 18 inches. And so I made sure that this was 18 inches from here to the front, so that even if he used like the tunnels in order to get a little bit closer with the Zone Thropes, he was not going to be able to get at a Dorn. So with like a Dorn here, I had one Russ here, because I had a Russ here because if the Zone Thropes went for a Russ, cool. And then I had a Scout Sentinel, something like this. And then Hutch came in with like his Zone Thropes, wherever they were, like right in here, with the idea that they were going to try to take out the Exterminator. I overwatched them, killed 2. I think it was 2. And so then this unit only shot with 4 of the las cannons, and when they shot, they only did like, I think it was only 2 damage to the Exterminator. So I was like, great. I'd already killed 2 of the Zone Thropes. The Zone Thropes did basically no damage, and then I was just able to take these tanks, like shoot here. I think another one came like over here. I think it touched like here in order to like shoot something over this way as well. And then the one other thing that Hutch ended up doing that I think was a little bit bold was he took his like Raveners somewhere over here. And so he's got like 5 bugs, but only one of them goes up for free, right? He's only got the 1 unit of Raveners in order to like up, down, and make sure that he can continuously like spawn all these tunnels all over the place. And the problem with having these Raveners over here is I had like my other Leman Russ, something like this. And then when they came over here, I was able to come over here, and I was kind of willing to sell out with this Russ, because I know like the Trigon's probably going to take both of them to actually like kill a Russ consistently. And I was willing to sell this out in order to get rid of all of these Raveners. So when this was gone, there was still like Trigon, and then that was like the rest of his damage. Because I had already killed this, I had already killed the Raveners, I had already killed all the Genestealers. They had like come out over here and like weren't able to kill the Hellhound. So I more or less killed like all of the damage that my opponent had. And then from there, it was a whole big switch into like, okay, I know I'm going to be scoring 100 points relatively easily. Let me make sure that I can stop my opponent from scoring as much as possible. So from here, I was just like, let's get stuff over here, make sure my opponent can't control this one, make sure my opponent can't control here or here, just make sure my opponent cannot do anything else in the game. And I was pretty successful at it overall, because I ended up winning this one 100-53. Now, do I think there was a real path to victory for Hutch in this game? I think the only real opportunity my opponent really had in this game is to potentially try and just entirely collapse a flank, right? If you take like a Trigon over here and like the Trigon like and the Moloch and like the Zoanthropes like coming in over here and they all are able to go at the same time, you like take a bunch of 7-inch charges out of the tunnels and you use the reroll aura in order to try and get as many of them in as possible. If he had been able to do this and like kill a Hellhound and a Russ in such a way that my tanks that were like over here were not super easily going to be able to respond, maybe that's a path to victory. But Hutch ended up coming in a little bit too piecemeal, and my damage isn't the highest in the game, but I can definitely deal with only a small amount of bugs, especially when most of them don't have a ton of invulnerable saves. This round ended up being a little bit closer than we would have liked because, unfortunately, Tauren ended up losing like 3 Norns in like 1 turn or something like that. So this one ended up collapsing, but Ken got a 17, Nick got a 10, Tim got an 11, and I came back with a 19. So 2 big wins. One, my big win, basically canceling out this loss, and then 1 additional big win going in our favor. We were able to pull this one out 57-43. For our next round, we ended up playing up against Dice Don't Lie, and I got the pleasure of playing up against William Conwell. He is one of the guard players who hangs out in my Discord fairly often, but unfortunately, for this event, the team was put together very last minute in order to make sure that there was not going to be a bye round. And so Will ended up playing Tyranids for this one as well. Instead of being on Subterranean, Will was on Synaptic Nexus with Talons of the Norn Queen once again in Disruption. Will was playing a Broodlord with a like leadership changing aura, Hive Tyrant, Nero Tyrant, Swarmlord, 10 Gargoyles, 1 unit of 10 Hormagaunts, 2 units of 10 Termagants, 1 Biovore, 1 unit of 5 Genestealers, which was attached to the Broodlord, 1 Lictor, 1 Nero Lictor, 2 Norn Assimilators with the 4-up Invul upgrade, and then 1 Norn Emissary. Now, once again, this was the same mission. I believe this one was my map pick instead of my opponent's map pick. One of the reasons why I chose this map pick was because on this one, there are 2 objectives that are in both players' territories, and crucially, this one is not. So the Disruption player, my opponent, does not get the ability to score this one for 4. Instead, this one only scores for 2 points, and these will score for 4, but not having access to do it in 3 of the 4, and only having access to not having access to getting all 4 of them super easily, and the safest objective going to be one that is only going to be scoring for 2 every single time is something that I do like forcing my opponent to do. Will was great, but he does not play a lot of bugs. And one of the big things about this board is because my army is so fast, I can generally move basically anywhere I want, and I had complete shooting dominance against my opponent. I think Will's army has a couple of flamers. And so in this game, I know Will ended up putting like a Norn something like this, another Norn like here, and the third Norn back here. One of the issues with having a Norn here is it cannot go through this wall because it's a dense wall. And so this Norn ended up having to come around out like this, ended up spending about like an extra turn just kind of going forward. And I know Tauren actually had kind of a similar issue in his game because he ended up deploying like a Norn just kind of out in the open in his game up against Chaos Knights the previous round. And then the Chaos Knights were just able to kill it because it was just in the open. And so there maybe is an argument that Will just needs to put this somewhere in cover and just accept that I can shoot it if I want to. This game was pretty entertaining because in the previous game when my opponent called Shadow of the Warp, I passed the Battle Shock test on every single one of my tanks. However, in this one, I did not pass the Battle Shock, and I think I passed it on one of my Russes, and both Dorns and the other Russ were all Battle Shocked. So at the time, there was like one Norn like this, and another Norn had moved out something like this. This one was still kind of out of position somewhere over here. And here, my opponent calls a Shadow in the Warp. So I just go, well, it is time to see if I can kill a Norn even through the Battle Shock, because if I can deal with these Norns, there's not a whole lot of other real threat to my tanks. I just need to be able to take them down, and then from there, I can run them around and make sure that I can deal with everything else in my opponent's army. So I end up having like one Dorn touch here, my other Dorn touch something like this. I think I had one Russ something like this over here, and this Russ was something like this. I was a little bit uncomfortable with this Russ's position because depending on what Will rolled in his charge, he could potentially actually get to it with this Norn, but I needed to make sure that the angle did exist so I could actually shoot at these guys. And the shooting went surprisingly well. I shot this tank first at the Norn and actually did like a pretty good chunk of damage. The next thing that I ended up doing was I took this Dorn and shot it, and the Norn just died. Right, I was a little bit. I also had like a Hellhound somewhere. I think the Hellhound was like here or something that like gave me ignores cover. But between a Hellhound, one Russ, and a Dorn, basically all of which were battle shocked, so I was just hitting on like fours, rerolling ones. I was able to just kill the Norn, and that was very very exciting because it meant that I got to put a lot of other damage. This Russ and this Dorn got to shoot at this one, and this one came down to like I think it was like down to like 5 after shooting. And then the game from there became another situation of I need to make sure that I can stop my opponent from scoring a whole lot. One of the funny things that happened in this game for several turns was Will kind of went with an attack over this way, and there were like 3 reactive move bugs just like hanging on over here, and they just kept pushing the button on this objective over and over. But the Norn and then the Broodlord and like one of the Lictors came out over here, and they were just trying to flip my home objective over and over again. I was able to deal with it because these guys are not super durable. But the Lictor just like hung out here for a while, just like in combat with this Russ for like several turns because I didn't want to spend the time shooting at it, and he wasn't really doing any damage to me. But the flip side of this was pretty entertaining because I had dropped Aquilons somewhere over here in order to deal with the Biovore, and I was able to grenade it and shoot it to death. And these Aquilons ended up just like hanging out basically the entire rest of the game because after they came down to deal with this, there was still like the Neuro Tyrant hanging out over here, but Will had defend stronghold, and so these Aquilons like rushed over here just to like put some OC on the objective, and then had like a Taurox just like run over here in order to put like just enough engineers on this objective with like the Taurox in order to make sure that I was continuously putting enough OC that so that he would never score or defend stronghold. And then the Neuro Tyrant like came over, tried to flame the Aquilons, didn't get all of them, charged into them again, didn't kill all of them, so they ended up like falling back. I think the last action in the game was legitimately like the Neuro Tyrant that was just like hanging out on the objective, like moved to fall back and shoot and do things, but it moved in such a way that I could like reactive move my Aquilons such that the monster couldn't let it go like through the wall or whatever and still make sure that they held the objective. And I only did this because I looked at the final scores and realized, these 2 points, the 2 points that I denied by having models in my opponent's DZ was enough to get a diff. Because he was not able to kill both like the Taurox that was like hanging out here and then also the Aquilons that were over on this side. And I thought that was very funny, like how much resources I ended up devoting to just deny defense stronghold over and over and over again. I do think the Norn that was like here and then it came like here and then it was like here. And then I think on like turn 4 it like finally crashed like here or something. It was probably the biggest way for Will to try and claw some diff back. I do think a more concentrated push like over here, like if this Norn was just like, you know, like got its tail like in cover over here, and then you just have like the 3 Norns in order to say, hey, we are playing this part of the board. And then you use like the Broodlord and the Genesters to like come over here, rapid ingress, and just create some space that way in order to try and contest this once or twice. I think that probably would have been a more successful game plan overall. Will still did totally fine with an army that he doesn't really play. I ended up winning this one 100-78, which was a 14-6. This one was our biggest win of the event, I believe. Frami got a 17, Tim came back with a 12, I came back with a 14, Ken got a draw, and then Torn came back with a 17 as well. However, I do want to make sure I express how much I appreciate these guys coming out. This was not a team that existed more than like 24, maybe 48 hours before the event actually started, but making sure that there were enough players that no team ended up having a bye, especially at a 5-man teams event, was really appreciated. So I really appreciate these guys coming out. We were also, to be entirely honest, we did not like our Matrix in this team very much because it was like this was like 2 supers, 18 Bulgrin, um, just knights, 3 Norns. This was like 30 Wolfguard Terminators, and this was just kind of unusual Tau list. But it's just like this was all thick, and we had like Frami could handle thick really easily, and the rest of us were like, we're not super excited to play against thick like that. So very happy this all ended up working out. I heard Frami killed like both super heavies in like a single turn, so I was like, all right, cool, game's over, well done. But at this point, we were 2-0 and feeling like we were in pole position. We felt like we should be in a spot where, as long as we get our wins, as long as we are playing relatively well, we should be able to win the event. For our next round, we ended up playing up against Underwhelming Force. I had the pleasure of playing once again up against Tom Martin, another member of the Discord. And Tom was playing Renegade Raiders. It's guard, but spiky. He was playing Renegade Raiders Reconaissance. He had Huron Blackheart with Master of the Maelstrom and 5 Chosen. He had a solo Chaos Lord with Jump Pack with some enhancement, 2 Cultist Mobs, 3 Rhinos, 1 unit of Bikers, 1 Predator Destructor with Las Cannon Autocannon, 1 Defiler, 1 unit of Raptors, 1 unit of Corsairs, 2 units of Trader Guardsmen, and then 2 units of Noise Marines. Renegade Raiders, of course, I think it's army-wide assault, and they get +1 AP if the thing that they are attacking is on an objective. And this detachment has one really, really good stratagem where if they were capable of fighting during the fight phase for 1 CP, they can just make a normal move at the end of the fight phase, or a fallback move. So they can kind of go wherever they want. And it is a fantastic trick that is really, really powerful, and good Renegade Raiders players, you can really feel the control that they have when they actually do that. So this game was once again on my board pick, and I thought this was going to be a relatively good matchup for me. However, there are a couple of things that were not going in my favor. I think I picked the wrong board. One of the big things about this is the fact that there is just this pocket here that a Rhino can hide relatively safely in. And even though I can take a tank and go like up this way in order to go for it, the tank will then kind of be like out of position for, at least another turn. And if I can't get 2 tanks able to shoot first the Rhino and then the dudes inside, killing just the Rhino is not super exciting, especially if he ends up losing a guy and then can bring a model back and get bonus movement in order to make sure that he can land some charges, ends up being a bit of a problem. The other issue that I had was I really underestimated how difficult it was going to be to actually flip this objective, because the Trader Guard, if they just kind of like hang out over here, they're difficult to get to, and they're also each just 2 OC. And one of the big things about the recon on recon is you need to push a button on 3 objectives. Usually it's like this one, and then you'll do your home at some point, or you'll do your natural at some point. But my problem was Tom just had like this screened like the whole time, and I was never going to be in a position where I could like drop Aquilons onto this objective in order to get this action done, which is huge. It's 7 points for getting your 3rd action. I've oftentimes heard it just called an extra cleanse, and an additional 5 points lost because if you get all 3 cleanses done, you get an additional 5 points. So this is 21. This is 26 points for pushing all of these buttons. But if I can't push this one, this is only 14. So I instantly lost 12 points of primary because I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be to push this button for my army. So I think I lost some diff over here by not realizing how powerful of a staging spot I give my opponent. And I also lost at least 2 diff by underestimating how powerful this was going to be for my opponent. And so realistically, I think I had this as like a 12-13 in my mind going in, but I immediately lost myself down to about a 9. And I think this immediately became about a 9 for picking the wrong board and also misunderstanding the matchup. Now, the third thing that I think immediately lost me diff. So again, I thought this was initially going to be, we'll say it was a 12 beforehand. -2 for picking the wrong board. -2 for having a matrix that was probably just not accurate. But I think the third thing was realistically about another -2 because I went second. And the issue with going second is the fact that Pushing this button over here is way, way easier if I go first and can actually dictate the tempo of the game. There's not a lot of things in my opponent's army that are particularly scary. The Defiler is scary. Uh, the Predator is like a little scary, but like not super scary. And then the Huron Brick. Those three things are scary to my tanks. But I think I lost even more diff in this one because I over-respected this Rhino. I ended up taking like a Scout Sentinel and like a Taurox and Engineers, and this was able to like kill the Rhino. I ended up charging like the Taurox over here and tank shocking it to kill the Rhino from full, to get the last wound off of the Rhino. But the guys that are inside that come out, they have access to a full hit and wound rerolls, but they only get access to that if I am on an objective and also if the guys got out of a transport this turn. And that's the biggest damage buff. And without that, it basically takes the entire chosen brick in order to kill a single Leman Russ, especially if the Leman Russ is not on an objective. But I respected this brick so much. I gave so much space. I was relatively far back, and eventually I was like, okay, I can't continue letting my opponent just, do something. I'm going to put like a Hellhound like here and a Russ like here. And then this brick came out and killed neither of them. And I was like, oh my god, I have been respecting this brick so, so much. And the only reason why this brick came out at all, instead of just like sitting there and like threatening to hit me over and over again, was because Tom, the previous turn, had like brought out his Defiler here and it like killed like a Hippogriff or something. And I brought out like the Russ and then like, I think it was like a second Russ and like the Rogal Dorn, something like this. Like, and this all came out in order to try and take down the Defiler. And the Defiler also just like was like not dying. I was doing to be fair, I like hit and wounded almost every single hunter killer this game. It was actually really funny. But Tom would immediately come back and like roll a 5 or 6 on his invul save, so the hunter killer would do nothing. And this Defiler was sitting on like 1 for several shooting activations. I'm like, oh god, if this Defiler like lives, the game is still cooked anyway. So I think in retrospect, what I'm supposed to have done is I'm just supposed to go, right? And Tom actually like messaged me about this later. And he was saying, yeah, I thought you were just going to kind of run at me. Just deploy on the line and just go. Because Tom said that his list has like enough damage that's like a little bit questionable if your opponent can just go. But I had enough like durability, like high toughness, good save skew that it was really, really questionable whether or not he would actually be able to deal with that. And I think one of the really big things that I need to do if I were to play this again is I would want to put like at least a Russ here such that it can go like touch this terrain piece and make sure that the Rhino that is going to be trying to stage here cannot do that. And then the other thing that I probably need to do is I need to make sure like maybe honestly like both Tauroxes are here just so I can go put enough OC on this objective to make sure that I get these 7 points. That said, I do want to give really big props to Tom. Really cool guy. I always enjoy my games against him. But he did a really good job of like giving me the absolute minimum over here. He gave me like a Corsair unit or whatever, and then he like Rapid Ingress and put like Raptors over here. And so these chosen were just kind of able to sit here for like 2 turns because he had other things that were going to make sure that I was going to not control this objective. So I think overall, to kind of recap, I initially thought this one was supposed to be a 12. I think I lost 2 by picking the board, or rather picking the wrong board. And I'll show you guys the one that I think I should have picked instead. I think I lost another 2 because I misunderstood how hard it was going to be to do the action. I think I lost another 2 because I went second. And I did not get to set the pace of the game. And then lastly, I think I lost at least another 2 because I was a pussy. Right? I think I over-respected the hell out of this Rhino. I let this Rhino eat my soul. I let this Rhino control so much of the game when I really, really didn't need to. I overestimated so much of its damage. I'm so used to this brick being like impossible to kill and doing like infinite damage because I'm used to playing against this brick in like Pact Bound Zealots where it has access to -1 to hit and it has access to crit 5s. and then it has access to just reroll wound just like whenever you want it. So I'm so used to this brick just killing whatever it wants, being wherever it wants, and then being impossible to kill. Whereas in this army, it's like it's good, but it's not absolutely ridiculous like I had imagined it being. Officially, I lost this one 5-15, but we realized after the game and after we had already submitted that both Tom and I had independently done two different errors that canceled out. I had accidentally put that he had only scored 3 for center ground on top of 5 when he actually scored 5. And he forgot to give himself primary for end of game having done all 3 of the buttons. So we had agreed on a score, but we had 2 different errors. So officially, it was submitted as a 5-15. In reality, it was actually a 4-16. Now, I think if I were to play this one again, I would want to do it on this board. And the main reason for this is, where does the Rhino stage, right? The Rhino, if it wants to come and like stage here, it's got to be like here, and then it's got to roll like a reasonable advance to even get here. If it's here, I can come get that, right? That's an angle that is not difficult to get to. I can be here, here. I can shoot this thing cross court. If it wants to stage here, again, I can come get that. So the Rhino doesn't have a natural staging spot. The other really big thing about this is I shoot way harder than my opponent does. He's got 1 Defiler, which maybe kills a Russ, but also maybe doesn't. He's got a Predator, which shouldn't kill a Russ, but he can get lucky. Then after that, it's like some Noise Marines, which are just, I'm just going to be saving on 4s. So his damage is kind of sketchy at range. And from here, it's relatively easy for me to push this button. It's relatively easy for me to push this button. And this is the toughest one to push, but it's also still really close to me. I can end up sending a lot of dudes, right? A tank can push this later on by just like towing on over here later. I negate 2 of the main things that my opponent has, right? The Rhino, nowhere natural to stage, like here, maybe, then it's a reactive piece. Because this is not safe. I can come get this for sure. This is like maybe like there's maybe a safe spot to put it like here, but I can still get like over here and dismount it. So I think in retrospect, if I simply picked this board instead, I probably get at least 2 or 3 diff off of it. This round ended up being a very narrow loss for us. Partly, I came back with the lowest score relative to what I was expecting. I was expecting this to be about a 12. I came back officially with a 5, so I was -7. This came back right on target from what we were expecting. Torn swung up a tiny bit. Ken, we knew this one was going to be very high variance at coming back with a 10. And then this one, Frami was so excited to get this one. We call it calling the booyah, right? Because the Team USA has a thing where if you matrix that you're going to 20 someone and they come back with even a single diff, you have to buy the entire team drinks. And Frami kind of called his booyah here. He was like, I'm going to kill this guy. And then he did, and he came back with a 10. So, he initially said 14, but probably higher than that. And then I said, probably about a 12. I came back with significantly lower than that. So unfortunately, I swung down pretty hard. Frami swung down hard, not quite as hard as I did. And then we needed 1 more point in order to get a draw here. And this took us from a spot where we were in pole position. We thought we were going to be winning the event to, oh, wow, we maybe don't even podium from this position. For our last round, we ended up playing against the other, and for our last round, we ended up playing up against the other Underwhelming Force team, Underwhelming Force Shrimp Hammer. And I got to play up against Ty. And I have to say, my game against Ty was one of the most fun games I've had in a long time. I enjoyed the rest of my games. I enjoyed playing up against Will. I enjoyed playing up against Tom. But my game up against Ty was that next level of something that I really enjoyed. Ty was a very precise player. He made sure that he wasn't moving models until we both knew like what the intent was, and I tried to do my best to recreate that as well. Ty was playing an interesting list because it was Brazen Engines and Possessed Slaughterbound. So Possessed Slaughterbound gives all of your 8-bound a D6 Surge, and I'm not sure entirely what Brazen Engines does, but the whole idea of this is every single one of the 8-bound units does quote-unquote infinite damage. It can kill whatever it touches. He had a Slaughterbound with enhancement leading 6 Exalted 8-bound. Another Slaughterbound leading 6 regular 8-bound with Explode on a 2+ for D3, which is pretty funny. Lord of Reconaissance, I believe, gives Deepstrike with 3 8-bound. Another Slaughterbound with another 3 8-bound. and I think this one gives you crit 5s. 1 Defiler, 2 Forge Fiends with Hades autocannons on the sides. I think it's saving points. 1 Jackals and 1 Mauler Fiend. Oh, the Brazen Engines gives the Demon Injured Surge. I don't know what else it gives them, to be honest. Once again, I got to be Defender, and this was going to be Recon versus Purge. Now, the Recon versus Purge game is going to be, it's usually going to be very high scoring. It's pretty common that both of you end up scoring something in the 90s. So I expected that as long as I was playing this one properly, it was going to be difficult for my opponent to stop me from scoring. However, I also had this one marked down as volatile, because if my opponent just goes and his go turn just like goes well, he touches my entire army, then I'm just kind of screwed. But also, if he goes and misses, I kill him. So it's, there's not much of middle ground if he just like goes for it. So if my opponent wants to make the game volatile, he absolutely can. But here's the thing about the Recon versus Purge. So the Recon player wants to kill something on each objective, while the Purge player is on the objective. So if something is here and it gets a kill, this is Consecrator, bathed in blood, right? And if you do it on all 3, you're going to just rack up points every turn for the fact that they have been consecrated. You don't need to consecrate them each turn, you just need to do it at all. And on the flip side, the Recon player similarly needs to do an action. However, the action, you only can do 1 per turn, and you cannot do it on turn 1. But naturally, if the Recon player does all of these, so on turn 1, they're not going to score any primary that way. But on turn 2, they're going to get 3 for doing 1 of them. If you do 2 of them by turn 3, you're going to get 6. And then on turn 4, you'll get a 10. And then turn 5, you're going to get 10. So 26. So just for pushing all the buttons, you get 29 points. So you basically get, so you're getting 2/3 of your points just for pushing all the buttons. You can get additional points for holding 1. So if you want to max out from this position, you need to find 16 more points. You can get 10 if you go second by holding all of them. Or you can get 10 by going second by holding 4 objectives. So this will put you up to 39. And so then you just need to hold 2 objectives after that. So if you hold twice, this will put you up to 45. The Purge player is going to get points based on how many things that they have consecrated so far. And the big thing is 1 or 2 consecrate scores the same way, but getting your 3rd consecrate scores a lot more. So the Recon player needs to try and make this happen. They want to, 1, they want to make sure they don't give up any consecrates on turn 1. On turn 2, they want to make sure that they don't give up more than 2 consecrates. You can give 2, you just can't give 3. So if you go here, your opponent is only going to get 3. And then after that, you can't really stop it. So they end up getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this is 18. So they get 21 points more or less for just playing the game. But if you stop them from getting the 3 consecrates on turn 2, this is the difference between them getting a 21 and a 24, basically just for play. Then they can also get points for holding, and then for holding more, and then also for consecrating your opponent's home objective. So if you consecrate your opponent's home objective, that gets you up to 29. And then from there, you just need to find, again, 16 more points, which is not super difficult, especially if the Recon player does not want to play with you on turn 1 and sometimes turn 2, because you're going to end up holding this one for at least 8. So that puts you at 37. So both players are like upper 30s, low 40s just for playing the game, and then you kind of see how many you control after that. Now, one of the big things about playing up against this mini 8-bound list is it is very pre-measurable. You know exactly how far everything moves, there's no access to advance and charge, and there's only so many ingresses that they have access to. And one of the reasons why I picked this map for this one is because there's only so many places for these 8-bound to like move. And even though they scout, Ty ended up putting like one of the 8-bound units, something like this, with the idea that if he went first, they could go here. But if he went second, he was just kind of out of places to go. They would have to back up. And as soon as they back up, I am able to buy so much space. I'm able to buy so much space for myself. It ends up becoming very easy for me to like hold this for a couple of turns. And that way get to my 45. Luckily for Ty, he ended up going first and ended up coming out this way. And probably the coolest play in this game was I put a string of guys like here, and I think I had like a scout sentinel here, and then I had my Taurox over here. And Ty had a really cool play where he brought this unit out, and one of the stratagems at the I'm not sure which one of the attachments is, but one of the stratagems they have is when you make a charge, you can go through enemy models. And because of this, Ty found a way such that when these guys charged, they were able to go through models and then end up being something like this because he rolled high enough in order to also declare the Scout Sentinel as a charge target. And then I don't remember exactly how it worked, but there is a way for him to like get this model such that it was going to be close enough to engage this afterwards. And more than that, there was a Rogal Dorn that was like here, where because he was able to declare this as a consolidate target, he was able to consolidate over here and touch this Dorn at the same time. That was a really cool play, and I appreciated how Ty, before he moved any models for the pile and consolidate, wanted to make sure that this was possible. We called over a judge to make sure that it's still everything was kosher with this. We determined that yes, he is capable of doing that. So I wanted to give Ty a big shout out for that one. Luckily for me, I was able to just be like, I'm going to fall back and shoot this Rogal Dorn. So it came like over this way, this hit over this way, and we were able to just like shoot. And the unit ended up just exploding into a red mist. Other than that, I think this game was very controlled on both sides. Ty felt like a player who didn't really like taking big risks. He had his Defiler just kind of hanging out over here for a long time. There's like a Mauler Fiend, and like both Forge Fiends were like hanging out over here. Neither of us really wanted to find out if a Defiler was ever going to like kill a Russ or anything like that. But I think this was another situation where I probably should have just been like, I don't believe you, -1 damage, and now the Defiler and the Forge Fiends are going to struggle to kill a Russ. So I think this was another one where I probably could have been more aggressive. I probably could have been, especially on this side of the board, and just like sent things over this way. But I'm such a defensive player by nature that it was kind of hard for me to want to try and do that. This one ended up being pretty darn close. I ended up winning this one 11-9, 93-84. So because neither of us ever really opted into trying to make it a volatile game, it ended up being a relatively close one. And this ended up being a pretty big win for our team. So I do think at some point, knowing that the rest of the team was going pretty well for my side, there's probably a situation relatively earlier in the round where his team could have come over and said, like, hey, go for some of those long charges. We just need to find some point somewhere. But Ina came back with an 11-9. Frommy came back with a 15-5. Torin came back with a 6. Ken came back with a 20. And Tim came back with a 15 as well. And we ended up winning this one 67-33. And overall, that put us in second place. We went 3 wins and 1 loss. The team that ended up winning was more or less Rose City Ruffians. But it turns out 4 of them live together, and then they had one friend that doesn't live with them. But they end up getting 3 wins and 1 draw, which was enough to edge out over us in the round. I definitely think that this list that I end up playing is something that I need to be more aggressive with in a lot of ways. It turns out that there are a lot of armies that still can't deal with the amount of beef that I'm actually bringing, the amount of durability that I have in the list. And I need to leverage that a little bit more to force my opponent to come play the game. But I'm not going to lie, I also think there is a fair amount of just like, I'll call it pessimism about the army, like not feeling like I have a lot of damage. So if I make my opponent play the game and then I whiff, the game can go bad very, very quickly. So there's a bit of like competing emotions going on with that one. I felt like I played 3 games well, and I don't think I played my game up against Tom very well. I think he had a much better understanding of the matchup than I did. And so hopefully I'll get a chance to play him again relatively soon when I feel more comfortable and understand it a little bit better. For now, though, I'm going to go ahead and close this one out. I have interviews with John Winter Russell and Nemo the Fish coming up relatively soon, and hopefully Skark reaches out to me as well so we can talk about the WTC from the Polish perspective. I've got another event this weekend, and then I'm also getting ready for Challengers Cup in Utah. So if you guys are going to be at Challengers Cup in Utah this year, make sure you come say hi. I'll be playing with Gatehammer. For now, though, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.